Grow out your beards, ghouls and gals, brew some ale, and get ready to head deep into the mountain holds, as today we go over the history of the Dwarves in Warhammer Fantasy. Now, dwarves are not necessarily the first sentient creatures to be brought to the old world, but they are one of the oldest races in the world, which means we've got a lot to get through with these stunty guys, so let's not mess about. Dwarf civilization began long ago. Way before humans had even discovered fire, the ancestor gods brought their dwarven kin down into the World's Edge mountains. Grugni teaches mining and crafting, Grimnir keeps the dwarves safe from their enemies, killing the father of dragons, Skaladrak, and Valea teaches them runes and the art of brewing. Dwarven recorded history begins when Valea, after making many strongholds, returns to her favourite residence and strikes up 2 pillars. These are the first of the 1,000 pillars that would decorate the halls of Karaz-a-Karak. 100 years later, Grugni adds to these decorations, making the Throne of Power and gifting it to his son, Snorri Whitebeard. Shortly after, Grimnir strides into the Chaos Wastes, never to be seen again. This marks the first of the ancestor gods abandoning the dwarves, and the rest soon follow. Even without their ancestor gods, the dwarves managed to immediately begin their golden age. Snorri Whitebeard is named High King, and he strikes up relations with the elves, particularly one broody but friendly elf known as Malekith. Together, Snorri and Mali defeat the last remnants of chaos and begin a long-lasting friendship and period of great trade between the dwarves and elves. Malekith is named ambassador to the dwarves after a visit to Karaz-a-Karak from the High Elf King Belshazzar. Not all is well during this time, as the dwarves at Zorn Uzkul believe themselves abandoned by their kin and begin to worship Hashut in the hopes that the Father of Darkness can bring them salvation. Snorri Whitebeard, first High King of the Dwarves, dies many years later, having been a great leader for his people. He passes peacefully in his bed with only the company of Malekith, his old friend, to see him to his ancestors. Snorri swears that should his people need him, he shall return. Hundreds of years after the dwarves and elves establish their friendship, the elves come back to the old world, informing the dwarves of the civil war and Malekith's betrayal. But the 2 races continue to trade, and dwarven craftsmanship reaches new heights. While the dark elves are in the old world though, they begin to sow seeds of distrust and hate between the high elves and the dwarves. They turn dwarven kingdoms against one another and raid caravans in the guise of high elves, so dwarves fight against their fairer kin when they see them. Many small battles take place, and it seems that war between the 2 great powers of the world is brewing. The new High King, Gotrek Starbreaker, does not wish to see such a conflict come about, and so he sends an ambassador to Ulthuan to demand recompense. The elves send the ambassador back, but with his beard shaven. If you're not aware, the shaving of a dwarf's beard is the greatest shame one can experience. It is preferable to die than to lose one's facial hair. And so, once the elves had committed this atrocity, the War of Vengeance, also known as the War of the Beard, truly began. Their rage unbound, the dwarves set about from their mountains in untold numbers and destroyed any elven colony they could find, wiping settlements clean in the lands of Tilia and Estalia. Both the elves and the dwarves lost terribly in the War of Vengeance. Thousands were slain on each side, and the conflict lasted for over 4 centuries. Snorri Halfhand, son of Gotrek Starbreaker, is slain by the Phoenix King Caledor II after challenging him in combat. Snorri's cousin Morgrim then kills the elf lord Imladric in return. Finally, the war is settled at the Battle of 3 Towers. The bearded fellows have been besieging Tor Alessi for 100 days, letting their grudges fall in thousands of rocks that they pelt the port with. During the ensuing battle, Gotrek Starbreaker and Caledor II meet in combat. Caledor tries to end things quickly with his speed, but cannot overcome Starbreaker's fortitude. In time, the elf is worn down, and his sword is shattered by Starbreaker. Caledor begs for mercy, but Gotrek kills him with a single blow of his hammer, ending the war and wiping the elves from the old world. Those that remain either flee to Ulthuan or find refuge in the forests of Athelloren. The dwarves do not celebrate their victory, as far too much has been lost in claiming it. From here we enter the Time of Woes, where history gets a little bit fuzzy, as the bearded boyos are dealing with so many catastrophes they kinda forget to write a lot of stuff down. But we do have chunks of information from this period. To kick it off, earthquakes begin to ravage the World's Edge mountains. We don't know how much destruction is done by them, but many dwarven lives are said to be lost, all holds are damaged, mines are completely ruined, and the underway is damaged, cutting off the great strongholds from one another. This allows the Night Goblins to take advantage and begin the Goblin Wars, taking Karak and Gore and naming it Red Eye Mountain. Night Goblins and Skaven then invade and despoil Karak Varn. Orcs seize Ekrund and Goblins take over the richest gold mines at Gunbad. Greenskins continue pouring in from the east and take over the watchtowers at Mad Dog Pass. The Silver Road Wars then begin and are centred around Mount Silverspear. 20 years of fighting ensue and end only when Greenskins have taken over the mountain and rename it Mount Grimfang. At this point, the east is so ravaged by Greenskins that the Dwarves just pack up and leave, abandoning their hold on the eastern World's Edge Mountains. Even still, this isn't enough to bring their woes to an end, as shortly after the Troll Wars begin, when Thunder Mountain erupts and Morgrim Blackbeard tries to reclaim some of the Dwarves' former glory. Despite Morgrim's efforts, dwarf settlements continue to fall. High King Skorri Morgrimson leads his men to try and retake Karak Ungor. In what would be known as the Battle of a Thousand Woes, the massive dwarf army is broken and defeated, with Skorri returning to Karak before dying soon after. It seems that the territories the dwarves once called their own are no longer thus, as from breaking into a Skaven tunnel, the dwarves marvel at the sheer size and scale of the Ratway. The Greenskins also feel like a never-ending threat, as they continuously attack Karak Azgal and Karak Azul. Eventually Orcs manage to take over Karak Azgal, but are ousted by a dragon claiming the settlement as its own. They then head to Karak Draz and rename it Black Crag. Karak Azul manages to hold, but only just. The first Slayer King makes his way into Dwarven history during this period, and takes the name Ungrim for himself. Just after this more hopeful moment, Karak 8 Peaks falls. Peak by peak, the dwarves are driven back by the poisonous gas from the Skaven. King Lun rune seals the ancient hold and fights his way out of the peaks with his men, vowing to one day retake them. When Karak is under siege by Ugrok Beardburner and High King Logan Proudbeard is taken captive, it seems that the great age of the dwarves will never come again, and that what was once one of the great powers in the world will fall to utter ruin. However, just as the dwarves are facing their greatest fall, their new neighbours rise to new and greater heights. The Silver Age of the Dwarves begins strangely with Kurgan Ironbeard, the new High King, being attacked while on the road. He is saved by a young man and in return gifts this excellent warrior Galmaraz, the Skull Splitter. Dwarfkind had been aware of humanity for centuries and had traded with them as well as taught them simple smithing and crafting. Now, with the help of the new chief of the Umbrians, the dwarves can rid themselves of the greenskin menace. The Battle of Blackfire Pass does not only push the Green Tide back for a while, but it gives dwarves new places to settle as they help build the empire with humanity. Many dwarves become masons, smiths and great tinkerers during this time, bringing human technology to new heights as well. This is only the Silver Age of the dwarves though, and we can't expect everything to be good and dandy. Dwarves find their oldest foes in the Elves of Athel Loren, with some disastrous results, as a centuries-old rivalry is reborn. Also, in the War of the Hammer, thousands of dwarf lives are lost retrieving the Hammer of Algrim from the Tomb King settlement of Mahrak, and then winning it back once it is retaken over and over again in the following centuries. There are some great wins for the dwarves during this age though. Gromril is discovered and mined in the caves west of the Blackwater. While Skaven do come in and destroy the mines later, the dwarves have managed to get a lot of ore for their armour, weapons and other things. Moreover, a lot of artefacts both old and new are brought into the remaining dwarf holds during this time. The lost Heartstone of Aldin Getgold is found in Dragonback Mountains, the Axe of Dale is discovered deep in the ruins of Karak Varn, the skin of the dragon Fearscar is brought to Karazakarak and covered with runes. This is also the time when Crag the Grim forges the Rune of Stone, taking his first steps to becoming perhaps the greatest runesmith of all time. The dwarves have essentially gone from "it's so over" to "we're so back" during this period, as their civilization does not reach the heights of the Golden Age, but considering the path they were on before almost certainly led to extinction, they're doing alright at this point in time. Technology also advances, as dwarven engineers develop the first steam engine. The dwarves even manage to retake Karak Azgal. Well, sort of, as Scalf Dragonslayer slays the dragon Graug, the Terrible, but because so many night goblins still populate the hold, he's forced to build a town just outside of it. As I said though, not all is great at this time. The Black Plague forces the dwarves to seal off their holds at risk of infection, and they soon become embroiled in the conflicts of the Empire as their human neighbours can't decide who they want to call Emperor. During the Vampire Wars, the dwarves come to fight the undead and take part in many battles, even besieging Castle Tempelhof. Our bearded heroes still have their own battles to take part in, mind you. Valkyr the Bloody invades Karak Gulg, breaking the dwarven lines with her maddened warriors and splitting open their rib cages in a horrific sacrifice to Khorne. At the Battle of the Black Falls, High King Alric and Goblin Warlord Gorkill Eyegouger both end up killing each other, and in their rage the dwarves massacre the Greenskins, but this leaves them quite vulnerable to the oncoming chaos threat. The Great War against Chaos sees another heavy loss for the Dwarves as they cannot stop the hordes from taking Karaka Drak and so bring down the mountain in a desperate attempt to slow Chaos. The Dwarves do aid humanity and the Elves in stopping Chaos at Kislev, but this marks the end of their Silver Age. However, this doesn't mean that the Dwarves regress once more. Instead, in their new age, the Age of Reckoning, High King Thorgrim Grudgebearer decides it's about time to do something about all these darn grudges in his book, and sets out to reclaim some of the lost Dwarven homelands. Mad Dog Pass is immediately retaken, and during this period it's not just Thorgrim who seeks to lead his people to glory. Other kings in the Slayer King Ungrim Ironfist and Belegar Ironhammer carve their names into Dwarven history. Ungrim Ironfist defeats the armies of Nashrak Badtooth, aided and eventually betrayed by the ogre Golgfang Maneater. Old Goldie is hunted down and beaten after, but Ungrim lets him go, believing it would be more sporting to kill him later. Belegar Ironhammer makes a claim in the Eight Peaks for the first time since the era of King Lun, and calls himself King of the Eight Peaks. Not all is well during this time, and the Greenskin menace still proves to be a worthy threat when Karak Azul is sacked and the son of the king is shaven and nailed to the throne. Also, after a great victory at Barak Var at the Battle of Bloodwater Sound, 5 Black Arks come to lay waste to the settlement, taking hundreds of dwarves to be put to work as slaves. This is a bit of a period of back and forth, really, with the dwarves gaining some wins at the Battle of the Jaws and the Battle of 100 Cannons, but due to Grom the Paunch, ogres and other threats, things don't always go well. Steady relations with the High Elves are also tested when Thorgrim Grudgebearer tries and fails to recapture the Everqueen after she had been taken prisoner by Manfred von Karstein. Tyrion isn't best pleased to say the least, and for a while things are shaky between the old enemies. Then, when the world is plunged into chaos when a twin-tailed comet arrives and the end times come with it, the dwarves don't get too much focus. But for a while, Ungrim Ironfist is the incarnate of Akshi, and Belegar Ironhammer makes his last stand against tides of goblins and Skaven at Karak Eight Peaks. He's killed, sadly though, by Queek Headtaker. Before long, it's really only Karaz Akarak that's left standing, with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Skaven bashing at its gates. Thorgrim Grudgebearer sees them off, but he is assassinated by Deathmaster Snitch, who himself is aided by a Vermin Lord. From there, they join the doomed final fight and are reborn as the Duradin in Age of Sigmar. From pretty much the start to pretty much the finish, those are the dwarves as far as Warhammer Fantasy is concerned. Which history would you like to see next? Did you enjoy this one? Let me know all of that and more in the comments, but thank you very much for watching, and I will see you soon.